Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we will be talking about the 2024 presidential election if Kamala Harris is able to improve on Joe Biden's 2020 election margin. Joe Biden won the 2020 election, the popular vote he won by 4.5%. So it does become a question, as it was indicated in some of the earlier polls in this race, where Harris, was leading the popular vote by 6%. By 8%, I remember, in one A-plus pollster. It was becoming a question of if Kamala Harris would actually outpace Joe Biden's 2020 margin. Now, of course, the race has tightened up a lot and it looks less likely, but still, what would the electoral map look like if Kamala Harris can improve Joe Biden's 2020 margin? So we will be going through three scenarios. Number one is if she improves by 1 percentage point from 2020, so she wins the popular vote by 5.5%. Then if she outpaces Biden by 3%, so that would result in a 7.5% victory in the popular vote. And then a 5% victory, a 5% expansion on Joe Biden's 2020 margin of 4.5% to make it a 9.5% margin. That would mean a Democratic blue wave for sure. So we will do this scenario. This is the 2020 election map. So of course we will be basing it off this. And then in the next video, we're going to be talking about those same cases, 1%, 3%, and 5% if Kamala Harris does that much worse than in 2020. So again, this is the 2020 election map, as you can see here. These are the margins in each state. So starting with a 1% expansion from Joe Biden in 2020, if Harris does 1% better than Biden did in 2020, of course, each state would become 1% more Democratic. Now, Joe Biden already won the 2020 election, obviously, 306 to 232 in the electoral count, adjusted for electoral vote changes after the census. That's 303 to 235. So obviously, if she's, expanding on Biden's 2020 margin and Biden won in 2020, then she is winning in all three of these scenarios, even if she does expand by just 1%. So starting with this 1% margin, you would see that, many of these safe states, would stay safe. That goes for the Democrats. They're only becoming more Democratic, as well as many of these Republican states. Even Indiana, which was almost a likely state. A likely state is a 15% margin, 5 to 15% margin, by the way. So even some of these states that were close to being likely in 2020, they will stay safe. So every single safe state from 2020 would actually remain safe, whether it's Democratic or not. So we have those all mapped out right there. So now we will move on to likely states. These are states that will be decided by a 5 to 15% margin. We just talked about safe states. Those were 15% margins or higher. So if every state is becoming 1% more Democratic, for the most part, nothing would change. Only one state really changes in terms of characterization. But all of these states, at least the Republican ones, that is what I'm talking about, they would stay likely. Now, the one that does narrow up to a lean margin, a 1 to 5% margin, is Texas. They voted for Trump by 5.6%. Texas would be reduced to a lean margin. So you can see, even with a point, a lot of these states are getting closer. Now, no states would become likely to safe if you add a point for the Democrats there. So they would all remain likely. And then you have lean states. So here, we could actually see some real changes. So, for example, Florida won't change characterization. It goes from 3.5% for Trump to 2.5% because she is doing that much better. And then you have North Carolina. Now, North Carolina, interestingly, stays with Donald Trump. It goes from 1.3% to a razor-thin margin of 0.3%. But regardless, he does hang on to North Carolina. Then you'll come to lean states like Nevada, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Harris is gaining, a 2.2% margin in Pennsylvania, 3.8% margin in Michigan, 3.4% margin in Nevada. However, they all stay lean Democratic because you need a 5% margin to make it likely. Now, as for Wisconsin and Arizona and Georgia, of course, all these states, the margin will be bumped up to over a percentage point. So all three would be much more comfortable leads there. All of them would be lean margin victories. That would be very useful in a presidential campaign. So with a 1% lead, you can see that nothing changes from 2020. It's a 303 to 235 electoral count. Kamala Harris still claims victory. But now let's get, now let's make it a little more interesting. What if it is a 3% expansion for Kamala Harris? So that would be a 7.5% victory in the popular vote. And 7.5% victory in the popular vote, 3% gaining on Joe Biden for Kamala Harris. So, let's just entirely forget about some of these states because, they are going to change characterization entirely, a lot of them. So, let's start, talking about some of these safe states. Of course, all the safe Democratic states, those are going to stay safe because they're only becoming more Democratic, right? 3 points more Democratic. But now you'll start to see some cracks. So, for example, you've got Missouri. That was 15.4% for Trump in 2020. That would be reduced all the way down to a 12.4% margin if Harris is gaining 3 on Trump. Montana would be reduced to a 13% margin. Indiana, 13% as well. So now you have quite a few of these safe states becoming likely. Again, Montana, Indiana, Missouri, and then, of course, Kansas and the Nebraska's 1st District stay likely as well. That should, I believe that it's all of it. Even Mississippi, actually. Even Mississippi goes from 16.5 to a likely margin for Donald Trump. And then wrong tab. Whoa, wrong tab again. And then as for the, safe Democratic states, those are going to stay safe. And then as for the likely states, though, let's talk about those. The likely Democratic states from 2020, you would have definitely one become safe over 15% margin, that being Colorado, right? That's bumped up to a 16.5% margin for Harris there. So Colorado now becomes a safe state. That's huge. Then you'll see just massive victories in a state like Virginia. That would be a 13-point victory. New Hampshire would be a 10-point victory. Minnesota would be a 10-point victory, etc. But that is the only one that does go from likely to safe. Sorry, wrong tab again. I'll try to keep it orderly here. So now we move on to the lean states from the likely states from 2020. Let's see for the Republicans at least. So you got, Kansas, those get even more narrow. But with a 3% margin, you'll see some of these likely states even become lean for Donald Trump. So a state like Iowa and Ohio, both were 8-point victories in 2020. Iowa wouldn't, but Ohio would be reduced to it would be a 5-point victory. So both these states would actually stay safe. Likely. Because 5% to 15%, that is a likely state. So Iowa and Ohio, good for Donald Trump. They would actually stay likely there. And then South Carolina would stay likely. But Maine 2nd would actually become lean. Now you could start to see some of these cracks forming for Donald Trump. You've got a state like Texas that goes from 5.6 all the way down to 2.6. That becomes a critical battleground state, well into lean margin territory. Alaska, lucky for him, does stay likely. And then you've got a state like Florida. Florida voted for Donald Trump by 3.4%, but if Harris gains 3%, Trump does keep it, but it's only by 0.4%. A very interesting scenario going on there. Then you've got North Carolina. They voted for Trump by 1.3% in 2020. Now this flips, right? 1.3 for Trump. Harris is gaining 3. She wins it by 1.7% there in North Carolina, making North Carolina a lean Republican state. The 2020 Biden states of Michigan and Nevada would just Michigan. No. Yeah, Michigan and Nevada. Sorry about that. Would both become likely states. 2.8%, you add in 3, that's a 5.8% victory. Same case in Nevada. So, these once critical battleground states don't become all that competitive at all. And I honestly do think that something like that can become a possibility for Harris. Then you've got Pennsylvania. That becomes a 4-point victory, 4.2% victory for Harris. Not so close after all. And then Wisconsin, Arizona, and Georgia are well over 3-point margins, of course, because she is gaining 3% in all these states. So now you flip a state. Now you flip North Carolina if you're Kamala Harris. You're at 319 electoral votes, down back from 303. And Donald Trump is only at 219, which is a 100 electoral vote margin there between the two. So that'd be huge. Now let's talk about a 5-point expansion. 5-point expansion from Biden in 2020. What if Harris gains 5% across all these states? Now I'm going to clear a lot of states because things will get very, very interesting. Let me just do all of these, if I may. So, these, of course, safe Democratic states, those are going to stay safe. You've got the safe Republican states. Now, quite a few start to head into likely margin territory, more than just the Missouri, the Montana, the Indianas, the Mississippis, right? So now you start to see Louisiana. But if Trump is losing 5 points, now he's only down to a 13-point margin in Louisiana. That should be concerning for him. That might be it. No, Nebraska. Even Nebraska becomes a 14-point margin into likely margin territory. But none of the others, good for Trump, stay. Or don't, stay, whatever. You know what I mean. And then, what was it? Just Louisiana? Yeah, and Nebraska becomes likely. That's stunning. And then, he's got, these more, these pretty healthy margins, but they were likely states like Iowa and Ohio. They were 8-point margins. Those are reduced to just 3-point margins. They become core battlegrounds. Lean margin, and now, it gets a lot more blue, as you can see the entire map. Then you head over to very, healthy margins for Democrats in Virginia, which was a 10-point margin. New Mexico, 10-point margin. And if Harris is gaining 5%, then she's over a 15% margin, making states like this actually safe states for Kamlers. Would you like that? Virginia and New Mexico safe. However, Minnesota would stay likely, Maine would stay likely, as well as the state of New Hampshire. Now, Nebraska 2nd would also stay likely as well. And then you head up to Maine's 2nd District. That's reduced to just a 2.4% margin for Trump. Very narrow victory. Then you've got, these pretty core battlegrounds. Get over to Texas. Trump won by 5.6 in 2020 in the last election. His win would be reduced to 0.6% if Harris is gaining 5%. 0.6%. Razor-thin margin, but good for him at least. He does hang on to it. Now you go over to, these lean margin states for Biden in 2020, Nevada, Michigan, Pennsylvania. They're well into likely margin territory now. No surprise there. And then you even will notice that these, if Harris is winning by more than 5% in these 2020 Biden states, Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia, she's over 5%, that those are likely margin states as well. So that's an automatic likely margin characterization for those states as well. Now the map becomes very, very blue. You've got North Carolina. Harris wins this one by 3.7% now. Again, a lean blue state. And finally, you look at Florida. Florida voted for Trump by 3.4%. Harris would win it by 1.6% if she is gaining 5%. So, wow. Now it's an electoral blowout. Harris wins 349 electoral votes. Donald Trump wins 189. Now, just imagine if she won Florida. Then it would be 389, almost 400 electoral votes. That would be stunning. So, whatever. Fun to map this stuff out. Very interesting scenario if that were to happen. So, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe down below. That helps out a lot. Again, drop a like, drop a comment, and I will see you all next time.